The room at the Grundy County sale barn smelled like wet denim, coffee, and old plywood, and I could feel every eye on me when I raised my bidder card for Rick Halverson's farm. Cal Hensley laughed from the back, not cruel at first, just dismissive, because I was standing there in patch coveralls with mud still on my boots and a coat sleeve sewn twice at the elbow. 10 minutes later, I signed a check for $1,126,000, and when the clerk called Nora Pike to verify funds, nobody laughed. But to understand how I got there, I need to go back to the first auction I ever watched. The day debt taught me what pride could not. I was 14 in March of 1987, standing beside my father outside a machine shed in Marshall County, while men walked circles around our equipment with clipboards in their hands. The loan on our operating line had reset from 9.5% to 14.75% in 16 months, but our yields had dropped from 152 bushels per acre to 118 after a wet spring and a dry finish. Therefore, cash flow broke where pride would not bend. We were farming 420 acres, but only 120 were ours free and clear. The rest was rented and financed, and interest alone had climbed to $38,640 that year. Dad said 6 words that day, and I still hear them. Never borrow for what rusts fast. He lost 2 tractors, 1 combine, and half his sleep. He did not lose the house because my mother took a night job at the nursing home in town, but he carried that auction in his shoulders until he died in 2001. If you want to know why a man in patch sleeves can write a 7-figure check without blinking, hit subscribe now. Because the arithmetic behind that moment is plain, and it took 36 years to build. By 1992, I was farming 160 rented acres by myself near State Center, and my first major purchase was a 1969 John Deere 4020 with a cracked hood and a leaking hydraulic line I could smell before I could see. I paid $6,800 cash at a county auction in Blackhawk County. The dealer had a clean 4020 on his lot at $13,500, financed at 8.25% over 5 years, monthly payment $275.78, total paid $16,546.80. My route was $6,800 up front, plus $1,140 in parts over 12 months, total $7,940. Difference, $8,606.80 on 1 tractor. Therefore, my fixed cost stayed low before I was ever called disciplined by anybody. People in town called what I bought junk. They were not wrong about appearance. My 1998 Ford F-150 had rust through both rear fenders by 2010, 312,000 miles by 2022, driver's seat foam showing where the fabric split, and 1 mirror held by a black ratchet strap for 2 winters. The truck looked like surrender, but it was paid for since 2004. Therefore, every month I had no truck payment became a line of freedom in a ledger. Cal Hensley showed up in my life around 2003, and he was good at his job. Press shirt, clean boots, new diesel pickup every 3 years, always a fresh dealership cap that had never met a rainstorm in the field. He would lean on my fence posts and say numbers with confidence, but confidence is not arithmetic. He offered me a 2003 planter package at $58,400, financed 7.1% over 7 years, annual payment $10,676. I rebuilt my existing planter for $3,920 in parts and 2 weekends of labor. Therefore, the spread was not philosophy. It was $54,480 preserved in one decision. I kept simple records on yellow legal pads until 2008. After that, Maria Halverson convinced me to use a spreadsheet template she had built for Rick. Maria was the sharpest bookkeeper in 3 counties, and she never pretended otherwise. Rick farmed 1,140 acres. By 2014, half owned and half rented, and he was respected because he worked hard and paid people on time. He was not reckless. He made one non-trivial bet at the wrong phase of the cycle. Therefore, his story deserves sympathy, not smugness. Here is the ledger sequence that changed my life, and these are my exact year-end notes copied forward. 1994, rented 160 acres, corn 146 bushels per acre, beans 44, net after rent and inputs $22,380, cash reserve year-end $11,900. 1996 bought first 40 acres at $1,150 per acre, total $46,000. Now, down payment $46,000, no loan, reserve after closing $4,300. 1999, added 60 rented acres, bought grain drill at consignment, $380, repaired openers, $210, total drill cost $590. 2001, father passed, inherited $18,400 and his tools, bought 23 acres bordering creek at $1,300 per acre, total $29,900, paid cash. 2004, paid off house note from 1991 build, remaining principal $27,600. No debt after July. 2007, drought-trimmed yields, corn 131 bushels, beans 39, still cash positive $18,220 due low machinery cost. 2010, bought 80 acres from retiring couple at $2,950 per acre, total $236,000, paid $160,000, cash plus private note, $76,000 to sellers at 0% for 5 years, payment $15,200 per year. 2015, all owned acres 143, rented 310, machinery replacement reserve $112,000. 2018, bought wrecked John Deere 4650 at estate sale, purchased $12,400, engine and hydraulics rebuild $8,730, total $21,130. Comparable field-ready unit, listed $46,000. 2020, cash reserve $318,600, owned acres appraised at average $7,900 per acre. Land value $1,129,700 on 143 acres. 2022, no operating debt, no machinery debt, no vehicle debt. Total net worth estimated $2,486,000, including grain inventory and equipment at conservative auction value. Those numbers look clean now, but they were built in muddy boots and late nights. I rebuilt alternators on a concrete floor with a kerosene heater. I welded cracked drawbars with borrowed rods. I bought tires at half-life and ran them until cord showed on the least loaded axle. I did not do this because I enjoyed hardship. I did it because fixed expenses are quiet killers on farms where weather does not negotiate. Rick took another path, and in fair years it looked smarter. In 2016, he financed a near-new combine for $286,000 at 4.2%, fixed for 5 years. Annual payment $64,246. He financed 2 tractors in 2018, Combined principal $412,000, blended rate 5.1%, annual payments $95,800. He added tiled acreage and drainage projects with a land improvement note of $190,000 at 4.9%. Total annual debt service by 2019 was roughly $203,000, but his revenue in strong years could carry it. Therefore, nobody called him reckless when corn held above $4. Then came the sequence nobody controlled. Input prices rose in 2021, diesel from around $2.60 to above $4.70 in stretches, nitrogen up hard, cash rent pressure stayed high. But the real break was interest. Variable operating lines that sat near 4% moved north of 8% for many producers by late 2023. Therefore, renewals became bruising meetings instead of routine signatures. I keep a list of men and women who got squeezed, because forgetting names is how communities start blaming character for math. Ben Klein in Grundy County ran 760 acres, good crop scout, steady worker. He financed the grain bin expansion in 2019, $348,000 at prime plus 1.25%, starting near 6.5% effective. By 2023, his rate was 10.25%. Annual interest near $35,670 before principal. 2 storm years cut yields, but rent did not shrink enough. Therefore, he sold machinery at auction in January 2024 and leased back 120 acres to keep farming part-time. He did not fail from laziness. He got trapped by timing. Wesley Dunn, near Conrad, operated a hog and row crop mix, and he signed a variable note for barn upgrades, $520,000. Feed costs spiked, hog margins compressed, and his monthly payment climbed from $5,860 to $7,940 after resets and restructuring fees. He filed Chapter 12 in 2023, kept his home, lost 2 barns, and now manages a feed mill shift while farming 90 acres with his brother. He still shows up for church cleanup every spring. Carla Jensen in Black Hawk County inherited 210 acres, but borrowed against equity to purchase neighboring ground at peak pricing, $15,400 per acre on 120 acres. Total $1,848,000. Her debt service with operating notes crossed $176,000 an annual. A dry year and basis weakness cut gross margin. Therefore, she sold the new parcel in 2024 for $13,100 per acre, booked a heavy loss after fees, and retained the original family acres, debt restructured over 20 years. She is still farming, just smaller. Rick Halverson carried the heaviest burden close to me. By late 2023, his total debt stood near $2,040,000 across machinery, land, and operating lines. At blended rates near 8.1%, annual interest alone was around $165,240. When corn averaged below his break-even on a significant share and 2 fields in low ground underperformed badly, he came up short by roughly $214,000, even after selling grain aggressively. He and Maria fought hard for refinancing, but one lender declined extension without major liquidation. I have told this story twice before this recording, once to my son Luke, once to Maria, because numbers are easier to carry when spoken out loud. Luke had not spoken to me in almost 2 years by that point. He wanted to scale fast. I wanted to hold debt at 0. We argued in the machine shed in 2021 over renting another 300 acres and financing late model iron. He left for Cedar Rapids, took a logistics job, and we exchanged birthday texts with no real words in them. The wound sat there every morning with my coffee, but I told nobody because silence is easier than apology for men my age. By the fall before Rick's auction, I had started walking timber edges at dusk just to calm down. There is a strip of creek timber on my 23-acre parcel. Cottonwoods, hackberry, and heavy undergrowth where deer move before dark. The first disturbance was tracks after a rain, 5 prints in soft mud, each around 16 inches long, wider than my hand spread, and with pressure depth deeper than a big man in boots would leave. I measured against my size 11 work boot 3 times. I did it again the next day. I told myself it was a prank, but there were no heel patterns, no lug marks, no boot edges. Therefore, I kept looking, not for mystery, just for explanation. I found broken branches at nearly 8 feet, fresh sap still wet, and a deadfall moved off a game trail in a way that suggested leverage from height and weight. I have stacked enough firewood to know what that takes. Let me stop here and ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where your eyes said one thing and your mind refused it for another week, because accepting it would change how you understand your own place in the world? Put that in the comments if you have, because that tension is exactly where this story turned. The week of Rick's sale, I was not sleeping much. Foreclosure notice posted. Auction date set. Out-of-state investor rumored to attend with a cap around $1.3 million for the package. House plus 240 acres plus outbuildings. Maria had stopped trying to hide tears in public. Rick shook every hand like a man saying goodbye without saying it. I wanted to help, but pride, his and mine, sat between us like a locked gate. 2 nights before the auction, a heifer got through a weak panel near the creek lot and dropped a calf in a drainage dip where water had undercut the bank. I heard bawling after 10 o'clock at night, grabbed a flashlight and a tow strap, and headed down in that old F-150 with the right headlamp dimmer than the left. The calf was alive but pinned awkwardly by a fallen limb and slick mud. I could not get leverage alone. I looped the strap and tried to shift the limb, but it held. I was breathing hard, half angry, half scared. The calf would chill out before dawn. Therefore, I stepped back and heard movement uphill, heavy but careful. Not crashing, not panic, just weight placed deliberately through brush. The beam caught fur first, dark brown with the lighter tips, then shoulders too broad for any man I know, and height that made the low branch line look wrong for scale. The figure did not advance toward me. It moved to the other side of the limb, crouched, and lifted in one smooth motion that cleared the calf's legs. I pulled the calf free, got it on the higher bank, and the cow followed, snorting and stamping, but not charging. The figure stayed still, watching for maybe 5 seconds, maybe 15. I cannot prove time in that moment, but I can prove what happened next. It stepped back into the cottonwoods and was gone without noise. I am not a man who builds his life on things he cannot explain. I build on receipts, soil tests, and weather records. But that night, something huge chose gentleness when force was available, and that fact sat inside me differently than fear. I drove back up the lane with mud on my sleeves and the thought that appearance can fool you both ways. The next morning, I called Luke for the first real conversation in 2 years. I said I had no speech ready, but I asked if he would sit with me at the auction. He said yes, after a long pause. We rode together from Marshall County to Grundy in silence, but it was better silence than before. At the sale barn, Cal spotted me at the coffee table and smiled that salesman smile he used when he expected a no. He asked if I came to watch another man buy what I should have expanded into 10 years earlier. I said I came to bid if the numbers fit. He looked at my coat and laughed with two others near him. It was not vicious. It was habit. But habit can still cut. The auction opened at $900,000. Bids moved quickly from local operators, then slowed as terms and condition disclosures got read. The out-of-state group came in at $1,050,000. Another local pair pushed to $1,090,000, and Rick stared at the floor with both hands on his knees. At $1,118,000, the room hesitated. I lifted my card and said, $1,126,000. The out-of-state bidder conferred, shook his head, and stopped. Cal muttered loud enough to carry, asking who would finance a patched coat bid that high this late in the cycle. The clerk requested earnest money verification. I handed over a cashier's check for $112,600 and signed the purchase contract, contingent only on title confirmation. Nora Pike got called to verify liquid funds for closing balance. Her reply was short, and it changed the room. Funds confirmed. Immediate ability to close. Here was the part no one saw from the rusted truck. My operating account carried $402,180 that month. A money market account held $311,940. Treasury ladder and CD positions totaled $487,000. Grain inventory marked conservatively added about $196,000, net of hauling and basis assumptions. Total liquid or near liquid resources, $1,397,120, before land collateral even entered the conversation. Therefore, I did not need permission from a bank committee to act in an afternoon. Rick cried in public once in his adult life that I know of, and it happened in that room. He shook my hand and said he did not need charity. I said this was not charity. This was structure. I offered a 10-year leaseback on 200 tillable acres at $130 per acre, while local cash rent was running around $275 to $310. Annual lease payment, $26,000 instead of roughly $57,000. Savings to Rick each year about $31,000 before input decisions. I gave him option rights to repurchase in years 6 through 10 at original per-acre acquisition basis, plus only documented closing costs, zero appreciation markup by me. The house and 40 non-tillable acres stayed with Rick and Maria under separate protected arrangement through their attorney, therefore their family did not get uprooted. Maria kept bookkeeping for 3 neighboring farms and added Lena Ortiz as a client that winter. Rick sold 1 finance tractor, restructured remaining notes, and cut annual debt service from about $203,000 peak to $84,000 by 2025. Not easy, but survivable. If you are learning something from this, share this story with one person who believes image tells the whole truth, because numbers have a way of humbling first impressions. People asked if I bought Rick's farm to prove a point to Cal. I did not. I bought it because distressed auctions attract capital that does not sleep in your county, and once local ground leaves local hands, it rarely comes back without pain. I also bought because I finally understood that money sitting idle can preserve dignity when used precisely. That lesson came partly from a creature I cannot classify in any ledger. Generosity only matters if it is concrete. Therefore, here is where those dollars went over the next 30 months. I created a private program we called Mercer Notes in 2024, administered with attorney oversight and Nora's bank compliance team. Total initial pool, $600,000. Structure, zero interest equipment loans capped at $75,000 per recipient. 5-year repayment, first-year interest only, set to zero payment if crop failure declared by USDA county metrics. Borrowers had to submit repair first plans before replacement plans. Recipient 1 was Lena Ortiz in Black Hawk County, age 29, renting 140 acres and losing custom harvest timing because her combine was unreliable. Dealer quote for a newer machine was $198,000 at 7.8%, 7 years, annual payment around $37,200. Under Mercer notes, she bought a 1998 John Deere 9600 for $38,500 and spent $16,900 refurbishing feeder house, bearings, and electronics, total $55,400. Her yield capture improved by reducing weather delay losses. Estimated gain 6.2 bushels, corn per acre in 2025. At $4.45 cash price on 140 acres, gross improvement around $3,861 before costs, plus no heavy debt burden. She is current on every payment and hired 1 part-time helper this year. Recipient 2 was Ben Klein, who needed a grain cart tractor after liquidation, left him borrowing from relatives. I finance $42,000 for a used 4640 plus $5,800 repair reserve. Ben paid back $9,600 in year 1, $9,600 year 2, and is on track to close in year 5. He told me the loan did not make him rich, but it gave him time to stay in farming until his son finished community college and could rejoin the operation. Ben currently farms 220 acres with a lower overhead and no variable debt outside seasonal input line. Recipient 3 was Wesley Dunn, who needed restructuring support more than equipment. I paid $68,000 directly to settle high-penalty arrears tied to 1 barn note in exchange for a covenant that he would not sign variable-rate debt above $25,000 without 2 independent reviews, 1 from Maria, 1 from Nora's risk officer. Wesley resisted that condition at first, but he accepted and later thanked Maria publicly at County Fair Week. He now runs a stable 90-acre plan and full-time mill position, and his home is no longer at immediate risk. I also funded scholarships because debt starts earlier than tractors now. In 2024, I placed $280,000 into a restricted local education trust, annual distribution target 4%, therefore about $11,200 yearly for ag mechanics and accounting students from Marshall and Grundy counties who commit to 2 years of local service. First awards were $2,800 each to 4 students. This year, 6 students received $3,000 each after additional contributions and market gains. Total direct commitments by end of 2025 were $1,074,000, including the implicit subsidy in Rick's lease terms over market benchmarks. Some people called that generous. I call it allocation. Wealth that sits still only protects 1 household. Wealth with structure can stabilize several. Cal Hensley's resolution was quieter than mine. He did not apologize in the sale barn. He did not need a stage. But 6 months later, he came by in a used service truck instead of his usual polished demo and asked if I would help him design a workshop on life cycle cost for younger operators. He had seen too many repossessions cross his desk. He now runs a used equipment advisory program at his dealership with transparent maintenance projections and financing stress tests at rates 2 points above current offers. Sales volume dropped slightly, but delinquency complaints dropped harder. He still sells new equipment when it pencils out, but he no longer sells urgency as a strategy. Nora Pike remained exactly what she always was, careful and plain-spoken. She told me once that banks are often blamed for arithmetic they did not create, and she was partly right. She also said the best borrower is the one who can say no to money. Nora retired in late 2025 after 31 years in community banking. Her successor kept the Mercer Notes compliance framework intact for other local private lenders to copy. Luke came back in stages. He did not move home immediately, but he started visiting weekends during planting in 2024. We had one hard conversation by the fuel tank, where he said he thought my caution was fear dressed as wisdom. I told him some fear is earned tuition if you pay attention. He laughed once and said he finally understood fixed costs the month. His apartment lease and truck payment left him counting grocery dollars. This spring, he returned full-time to manage logistics and marketing. We still disagree on timing, but we run decisions through a simple gate now: survive downside first. The timber giant thread is the one people ask about privately and avoid publicly. I did not file a report. I did not sell a story to a television crew. I walked the creek timber often through 2024 and 2025 and found signs twice more. One fresh print after heavy rain. One set of twisted saplings moved from a trail in a way that echoed that night. I never saw the figure clearly again. Therefore, I cannot prove what helped me with that calf. But I can say this without performance. Whatever stood there chose restraint and disappeared. I have thought about what happened next for years, and the thing that stays is not mystery. It is calibration. I used to divide the world into competent and foolish based on who carried debt. That was too simple. The real split is between those who model downside honestly and those who outsource risk to optimism. Rick was never foolish. Ben was never lazy. Carla was never greedy in the cartoon sense people use online. They were people making decisions under pressure, with partial information, and a culture that rewards visible scale over quiet resilience. Here is the deeper arithmetic that tied all of this together by end of 2025. If I had financed machinery upgrades from 2003 through 2022 on the packages Cal offered most years, my cumulative payments would have been approximately $1,148,000, including interest assumptions based on archived rates. My actual route, buying distressed units and repairing, totaled about $472,000 over the same period, including parts, outsourced machine shop work, and salvage premiums. Difference: $676,000 preserved. If I had carried an average machinery loan balance of $280,000 at blended 5.4%, annual interest around $15,120 before principal would have reduced reserve growth materially. Therefore, I likely would not have had $1.39 million liquid capacity at Rick's auction. Land appreciation on owned acres from weighted average acquisition basis near $1,846 per acre to conservative 2025 valuation near $9,600 per acre generated significant equity. But equity was only useful because no blanket lions blocked rapid movement. Annual living expenses mattered too. My house was paid, therefore housing principal cost was zero. Property tax and insurance averaged $4,780 yearly. Food averaged $6,900. Utilities $3,420. Clothing and boots $690. Health costs out of pocket averaged $4,200 after insurance. Truck maintenance averaged $2,150. Total core household costs roughly $22,100. $140. That number is not glamorous, but it is the distance between patience and panic in bad years. Multiplier effect by 2026 is measurable. Mercer notes financed 9 active recipients, not just 3, as word spread through referrals and repayments recycled. Combined acreage influenced directly or indirectly by those loans sits near 2,740 acres. Using conservative net income stabilization estimates of $42 per acre during high-rate stress periods, due lower fixed cost and better timing, that is roughly $115,080 annual resilience retained locally. Over 5 years, before inflation and weather variance, about $575,400. These are not fantasy numbers. They come from county extension baselines and actual operating reports shared under confidentiality agreements. Every named person deserves a full resolution. Therefore, here is where they are now. Rick Halverson currently farms 200 leased-back acres plus 40 home acres, debt reduced, marriage intact, blood pressure finally improving according to Maria, who tracks everything. He accepted that scale without margin as a trap. He mentors 2 younger producers on cost discipline. Maria Halverson runs a bookkeeping service for 14 farm clients across 3 counties, with average client debt ratio down compared to her 2022 baseline cohort. She still keeps Rick's records in a red binder and now teaches quarterly workshops at the co-op. Ben Klein farms 220 acres with his son Tyler, owns his house, rents his old home place to a cousin, and made his final Mercer note payment schedule adjustment early, without penalty. Wesley Dunn keeps the feed mill job and his 90 acres, attends debt planning meetings he once avoided, and has not missed a home mortgage payment in 18 months. Carla Jensen retained her original 210 family acres, leases 60 additional cautiously, and became an advocate for fixed-rate structures in local producer panels. She says she paid expensive tuition and does not hide it. Lena Ortiz expanded to 210 acres through a careful lease, hired that part-time helper full-time, and is on track to clear her note 1 year early if current yields hold. Nora Pike is retired, gardening, and occasionally consulting for community credit policy reviews. She remains the person everyone calls before signing paper they barely understand. Cal Hensley still sells equipment, but his sales room now includes a wall chart titled Total Cost Over Time with scenarios at stressed interest rates. He told me last month he sleeps better when customers survive. Luke Mercer is back on farm operations and grain marketing, engaged to a school counselor from Marshalltown, and currently arguing with me about whether to upgrade one semi. We will decide with a spreadsheet, not ego. As for me, I still drive the 1998 F-150, now 327,400 miles, still rusted, still paid for. I still wear patched overalls when they are clean enough for town. I still buy wrecked tractors when the numbers are right. Last month at auction, I bought a 1978 John Deere 4440 with front-end damage for $9,300, and I have a parts estimate of $4,980 to return it to field duty. A comparable financed replacement at current rates would lock roughly $1,980 monthly over 6 years, depending on terms. That payment would sit on my chest every weather report. I prefer grease under my nails and sleep in my lungs. The farm I bought from Rick is not called mine in conversation around here. People call it Halverson ground, and I encourage that. Ownership on paper matters legally, but belonging in a community is different math. I kept the old mailbox post with their name painted under mine. That costs nothing and returns trust at a high yield. I still walk the creek timber some evenings. I carry the same flashlight, but I do not sweep the beam as aggressively as I once did. I stop, listen, and remember a night when scale and gentleness occupied the same frame. I still do not know what stood across that ditch. I stopped needing a perfect label for it. What I needed was the reminder that assumptions based on appearance can be lazy, and lazy assumptions become expensive when lives are involved. The opening wound in this story was not just a foreclosure. It was the belief that being mocked means you are small. And the parallel wound was thinking people crushed by debt must have deserved it. Both beliefs died slowly, one ledger line and one hard season at a time. What remains is simpler. Keep fixed costs low, keep dignity high. Keep room in your life to help somebody when their math breaks before their character does. I still do not know what that creature was in the timber, but I know what that moment did. It pushed me to move when hesitation would have cost the family their ground, and it pulled my son and me back into the same truck for the drive home. If you have ever had one unexplainable moment that made you treat people with more care, watch the next story on screen, because that is where this conversation keeps going.